Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Surfing the Sea, where we go over a weekly recap of what happened in the upper division of the SEA region. It is, of course, MLP Dota and John X Fire joining you once again. John, how are you feeling after the week of SEA matches we just saw, sir?
It was a wild week for Southeast Asia. We saw one major upset, I think, across the series that did happen. Otherwise, I think, according to your predictions at least, week 2 went right according to plan. We did have our predictions from week number 1 to predict week 2.
John.
And yeah, it's on the screen. You can see Mike nailed all five of them right. I only got 2 of the series right, but man, that was quite the weekend. We can start it right off. First matchup, Vice versus TNC. TNC clean sweeping 2-0. Vice, they're still struggling here, Mike.
Look, you've got to tell me what's going on with Vice, John. You're the one who knows a lot about this team, and I know you talked to the coach, I believe, quite a bit on the side of Vice, so you've got a bit of the inside scoop as to what's going on. Now, mind you, obviously, I wasn't expecting them to do that well up against TNC anyway, if I'm perfectly honest. So I believe TNC is still one of the better teams in the whole division. But what happened? Is there any kind of internet issues still occurring for Vice from the last time we spoke, or is it just? Do we know anything about what's going with Vice right now?
Well, they didn't have internet issues in that series. I know that maybe it's a bit of underperformance now. I was talking to Coach CTY a bit. He was frustrated, to say the least.
Okay.
He was not happy with how his players were performing. I think he definitely thinks they're not showing up to their fullest form, which I'd agree with. I think Vice, they would still probably lose to TNC, but the way they lost was not the way expected. And in fact, I'd say there were moments where TNC actually looked a bit weak, a bit shaky up against Vice there, and Vice couldn't capitalize on it.
Let's be fair though, John, right? Because one thing we didn't really talk about at all is the draft that TNC did bring out. Now, they brought out Lycan twice, and we know Lycan is one of those heroes where if he has a good game, you're going to be in for a pretty rough time. Of course, Game 1, Lycan draft just works out very nicely. Game 2, back to the Lycan, but on top of that, they had an Ursa with Wolf Bite. It's... So now as the Ursa, you don't have any kiting issues because you're in the wolf form and you've still got all the spells of the Ursa. It's a disgusting draft in TNC, John. I want to kind of defend Vice a little bit here. Because I got to be frank, sure, maybe you're not a better team than TNC right now. But at the same time, TNC brought out the Lycan drafts. Which maybe you could blame Vice a little bit for letting the Lycan go through after the first game. But yeah, in some way, if I was the coach, I'd be kind of like, you know what, the drafts were a bit hard to go into. Double Lycan draft, a bit rough. Sure, of course, it is still TNC, and TNC do deserve their props. But Lycan Ursa, in general, disgusting.
Oh, that
Absolutely
is
disgusting stuff from TNC. But what I would expect from TNC, John, we do see them running these combinations with their drafts, and they are rather revolting once you figure out what they're up to. Apart from that, though, I guess there isn't much to say about Vice vs TNC, considering the drafts that they did have. Moving on to my next correctly predicted matchup, John, Execration versus Fnatic. Fnatic 2-0ing Execration. Do you have anything to say about this one?
I had a conversation with Crest, right? He shot me some ideas as to what's going on with this one. For him,
let people know who Crest is, John.
So so just to clarify, if you don't know, Crest Dota is my good friend, rank 270, peak rank of 120 in Southeast Asia. So he knows what he's talking about, and he's the guy that I bounce a lot of ideas off of. But he came up to me, and he looked at the Fnatic situation, and he said, this is where you can really see Fnatic rise up, not just because of the players, but the organization backing them up, right? Like, we've seen Fnatic go through these waves of great performances and waves of disappointing performances, and this time around, getting this clean win over Execration, who looked really nice in the first week. Like, Execration 2-0 TNC, who, haven't been looking as sharp, but again, are still one of the stronger teams in the region, and you can see that Fnatic, they invest in their players. They understand that the lineup is something you stew into. They went with that roster swap. You've still got DJ Jabs, and there was always a bit of tension with DJ moving to 5, Jabs on 4 there. But they are still really strong as a team, and you can see that the structure they have in place to support that team is playing a big part. I mean, Execration, they've been around forever, but they're a Filipino team. They're smaller. They're still trying to break into the bigger international scene, and you can see the advantage Fnatic has in the back end there.
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be one of those things, and maybe your standard viewer might not really realize this or hasn't really thought about it too much, but money does make a pretty big darn difference when it comes to Dota. Obviously, the more money the organization has, the better kind of housing you can give them, the better facilities, the better coaching, the better everything. Psychologists, the dietitians, everything you can imagine is being pumped into these teams to try and make them as good as humanly possible. So naturally, Fnatic, like you mentioned, John, does have that big kind of advantage when it comes to the financial side of things, which I don't want to just completely say that's why Fnatic won that series. Because Fnatic is a very good team, and they have a pretty darn great draft of players. And I think what we are also seeing from Fnatic is that draft of players finally coming together and kind of gelling and coordinating a bit better than we were seeing in the earlier weeks. So, I mean, mind you, that earlier week was still a 2-0 victory over T1. So Fnatic's still having a great old time, currently undefeated in the DPC. But I do think it is a necessary point to make that the wealthier teams are naturally going to have a bit more available to them to make them perform a little bit better. But I would definitely not say that's the sole reason, right? Fnatic is still definitely one of the better teams in the SEA region right now. To be expected, I would argue that they should have beat Execration, and they did quite convincingly. And I'm sure we are probably yet to see the best of Fnatic, as they are yet to go up against the better teams, I would argue. And I say that, again, they did verse T1 in the first week, but, Execration, I would argue, is on the lower rung of the upper division right now. Maybe next week up against Boom should be quite interesting for Fnatic. We'll wait and see for that one. Moving on to the next series, John, 496 versing Boom Esports. Bit of a banger between these two. We love the 496 boys. We love their play style. They did end up losing 2-1 to Boom Esports, who seem to be finally finding their footing here in this upper division for the SEA DPC. You got much to say on this series, John?
It's the same thing with Fnatic. You mentioned their roster is starting to gel together. It looks like Boom is starting to adjust to having Drew in the past one, which was their biggest issue in week one. Like up against Neon, it looked like they were trying this old playstyle they used to have with Dreamocell. Now it looks like they've had a little bit more time to hammer in some more scrims, study their opponents a bit more, and get that information out. I still don't know if Clairvoyance is on, by the way. I haven't shot the man a ping, but he still says it on his Twitter, and I'm sure he updates that Twitter. So I'm just going off the assumption Clairvoyance is still around, and as time goes on, I think Boom is the team that will steadily rise back up with that great coaching experience they do have in the back end, and with the potential of gelling even better with Drew. They're one of the rare stacks outside the Philippines that's all one nationality in the upper div, right? Like, it's only Boom Esports and I think Neon and Execration that are all Filipino, all Indonesian. So there's a lot easier communication there, a lot easier for them to start gelling down their playstyle. And you have to remember, Boom didn't play anything for at least 2 months. So this is them kind of getting back on their feet, trying to learn how to run again. And this looks like they have sort of remembered how to do that.
I would agree. I think Boom is definitely a team to watch out for, and we are expecting to slowly make their way back into the upper rung of the upper division. Of course, mind you, it was up against 496, and we know 496, they're either very hot or very cold, depending on how the draft and the game goes. And obviously this time around, while it was a 2-1, Boom Esports were just a bit too good, and 496 probably just a little bit cold on 2 out of those 3 games. Like you said as well, with Drew kind of just slowly coordinating and gelling better with the team, you are naturally going to see Boom increasing in their skill and just getting a bit better over time. Moving on to the big one though, John, the RAMBULAN, as we like to call it. TNC did actually tweet at me about this, saying a classic online RAMBULAN.
Oh yes.
Shout out to TNC, love those boys. They did lose 2-1 up against Neon. Now, John, I predicted this one correct as well. In fact, for anyone out there, I predicted 100% correct. So, just putting it out there. But they did lose 2-1, TNC, up against Neon. This was a very exciting matchup. I might add. I knew this one was going to be a good one, right? 2-1 TNC, they had one good game. That was the second game where they got their Morphling that they love to run. They got the Batrider. They were just very dominant. Just watching that game, you could tell Armel on the Batrider, he wasn't happy about how that first game went. And Armel was playing the Monkey King in the first game, and that was a rather disastrous game for him, I might add. Pretty rough time. Game 2, though, he got a Batrider. He was up against Yopaj Tiny, which is definitely a very favorable matchup for the Batrider, 1v1, and dominated the lane, and they just took off from there with Gabby's Morphling. But then you look at Game 3 again, and it kind of just went back the way of Neon, just that very dominant sort of playstyle, that hyper-aggressiveness. The mid-gyrocopter popping up as well in that third draft was very interesting, but Yopaj played a magic-style gyro, which actually worked out quite nicely, and just buying enough time for Natsumi to farm up on the Wraith King definitely ended up paying off for them. And I gotta say it right here, John, Neon's looking like the best team right now in the DPC for SCA. I mean, I might be saying this a little bit too early, but they are looking like the best team. I want to see them up against Fnatic, who are also undefeated, to really see how they go up against a team like Fnatic. But beating TNC 2-1, you got to be happy about that.
You definitely are. Game 1, John Uwell troll. Pause 5 troll.
Oh, don't remind
Tell
me.
me.
Don't remind me. I don't want to hear it. I don't.
Any team that can do that is just on fire, man. Any team that can run a pause 5 troll is just set.
I'm still too scared to go search a pub in SCA. I haven't searched up to any games in SCA. I can't. I'm not touching it. I'm not opening Dota up until I know that it's safe. Because these position 5 trolls, John, they're going to be around ruining everyone's games. I gotta give it props too. I mean, I remember watching the draft, seeing that troll being played as support at the end of the draft, and I was like, no. This can't work. It can't. It's a position 5 troll. It's definitely not going to work. And it worked. You know, I don't know what to tell you, John. He made it look good.
Yeah, John Uwell, man. He's a beast. And even in Game 3, he had, I think, the Brewmaster coming in, right? So it reminds me of the time, I think, in BTS Pro Series 2, where
that was
Skem
Game
Chen...
2, by the way.
Oh, Game 2, yeah. It reminds me of the time when Skem was running the Chen safe. You know, Neon is just that team that takes these weird picks and runs with them. And with the time given to blend in with Natsumi, the rest of these 4 players have managed to integrate that style again. And it is just something to watch out for. I think they're feeling really good, and that's going to shape up really well for their morale going into the rest of the weeks here.
All right, well, we'll go into the last series, 496 versus T1. T1, nice victory for them. It was another 2-1 up against 496. John, I did end up watching this game, and it was quite fun. The first game, of course, bringing out the techies did not work out up against T1. And you brought up the fact that T1 actually did end up drafting Monkey King 3 times in a row for Jackie in this series, and obviously it did work out quite well for them. 496, I mean, they're a very strong team, but it seems like they've really got to get these drafts under order a little bit. Especially up against teams like T1, who have a coach like March, who's probably going to be drafting for them as well. I think you do have to be a little bit careful if you're 496 playing against teams like this. But props to T1, obviously looking pretty good so far, and that was their first series victory throughout the SEA DPCs. They did lose their first series up against Fnatic, so they get some points on the board as well, which is going to feel quite nice for T1.
Yeah, it's important to start climbing. Every single game counts, as we've covered before. 496, I mean, they've got that volatility in draft. The Bombi Techies comes out, but it's just sometimes, like we talked about this before going live as well. It's sometimes they look so amazing, and then the other times it just falls flat. They're like that 50-50 team, which is funny because they were playing against Jackie. But they're like the 50-50 where it really rides on Bombi. Like, does he want to play Techies, or does he want to play his Phoenix or Wind Ranger or Oracle? And this time around, they gambled with the Techies, blew up in their own faces. So unfortunate for 496. Not a single win this week after a pretty strong showing in the first week against Vice. They dropped their series against Neon last week. They dropped 2 series this week. Not looking too good there, 496. They're still going to have to find a few more wins down the line.
Well, with that, John, of course, we do have week 3 coming up for SCA, and just based off the fact that I did predict 100%, I want to just make sure we do it again. I got to keep this roll going. So we should go over the matches quickly before we do head off and do some predictions, John, because I like predicting things.
Yeah.
So week 3, Fnatic versus Boom Esports should be pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is going to be heavily Fnatic favored, if I'm honest.
Okay.
I don't think Boom is quite at their level yet. I could see it being a 2-1 at best in Fnatic's favor. Honestly, I really can't see Boom winning this one out. So I'm going to go ahead and predict Fnatic. What do you think, John?
I'm going to go against the grain here, Mike, and I'm going to bet against you. I think it's Boom. I think historically Boom has won that matchup. Now, both sides have, again, experienced a roster shakeup, but as recent as BTS Pro Series 3 or Dota Summit 13, Boom was still kind of winning out against Fnatic, and I think that should give him a little bit of an edge going in. We'll see. I think it boils down to say, you look at your matchups mid, Moon versus Mikado. I think that kind of favors Mikado in my opinion. And when you just look at those solo player matchups, so I'm just going to go with Boom because they've won before against Fnatic. The past year has been pretty good for Boom against Fnatic. I think they'll try to hold on to that momentum as well.
Okay. Very spicy start for you, John. You'd like to take risks, I see. You're a gambling man. This next series should be quite interesting and quite a hard one to pick, I think. Execration versus Vice Esports. I don't know what to think about this one. I feel like Execration's the better team, but Vice could surprise us, especially based off what you were saying about the coaching staff just not happy with the overall performance so far. I imagine that is going to mean they are practicing quite hard going into week 3. And they've basically had a full week to get prepared for this 3rd week of the SEA DPC. I'm going to let you predict this one first, John. Execration versus Vice. Which one are you on?
It's a classic Rambulan, right? Like, it's another 2 Filipino team matchup. I think historically, Execration's always been on top as an org up against other Filipino orgs. It's like Signal Ultra against other Filipino teams. Execration is also the same way. There's a bit of a grudge match as well, quote-unquote grudge match between Yoa and Palos, because Palos used to be on Execration and was kicked off for Yoa, or left for Yoa. So there's a back and forth there. I'm going to have to say Execration in this one. Like, I love Vice. I've been saying Vice for the past 2 weeks, but I think after last week's performance, they haven't showed up. And Coach CTY has a lot of work to whip them into shape. I think Execration's looking good coming into this one, and they're going to try to play off of that. BDZ and Samael have the same hero pools as well, so no matter what happens, you're going to see some flashy pos 4s here in the series.
And I agree with you on that, John. I could see a 2-1 happening. I could see Vice taking a game off Execration, but I think overall the series will probably go Execration's way. And I could actually also see it being quite a dominant victory depending on how Execration are feeling that day. So we'll both vote on Execration for that one. And moving on, of course, into Boom Esports versus T1. This is going to be one of the harder matchups, I think, to really predict, as it really could go either way. I'm going to go straight out and say T1. I feel like as the weeks go on, they're just going to get stronger. I think the reason why we've been seeing them struggle is the fact that you are going to have to learn to play with Jackie, and Jackie's going to have to learn to play with the rest of the team. But just judging from last week's performance, they are looking very nice. I think after that 2-1 victory over 496, it should really lead them confidently up against Boom Esports. Now, ironically enough, Boom Esports also getting a 2-1 victory over 496 the same week. So both of them in a very similar position right now. A lot to play for as well, because they are fighting to get on top of each other in the group stage ladder. But my vote's on T1 this time around.
Yeah, I'm going to have to gun for the same team. I think Cuckoo's always sort of had Boom's number. Going back to Among Us days, going back to Geek Fam as well. So I think having Cuckoo in that driving seat and March in the back lines, I think they understand how the 4 core players of Boom work. I think Clairvoyant's got his work cut out for him in kind of counteracting, going against expectations there for T1. So for me, this one's more of mind games behind the scene. It's March versus Clairvoyance. And I just honestly think March plus Cuckoo kind of take that edge there.
All right, we'll move on to the next one then, John. Neon versus Execration. Neon's one of those teams where it's like they could look amazing up against TNC, they could look amazing up against Fnatic, all the big teams, but then sometimes you put them up against a particular team that you would never expect to beat them, and they'll beat them. And I'm a bit afraid with this one, because Execration, I feel like if they get a 2-0 victory over Vice and they're feeling good that week, they could run over Neon. And in all fairness, they have a very similar playstyle. They're both very aggressive kind of teams. It is going to be a matter of who outplays the other and who drafts better in this matchup. I'm going to stick with Neon, because you can't go against Neon, who are currently just undefeated in terms of series. But I'm not 100% sure. I feel like Execration might at least take one game off them. My vote's on Neon, though.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree. Neon's just look too good. I think riding off the high Neon's on is a lot more than the high Execration's on right now. Like, Neon's just feeling unstoppable. When you draft Troll support, when you draft Brewmaster support, you know you're confident. And I think Neon has every right to feel that confident. They're probably the top Filipino team right now. Even considering like TNC right now, like Neon's the full Filipino stack to watch out for. Execration has their work cut out for them historically as well. I think Neon has had their number throughout the past year, so I think it's pretty clear cut for Neon. I don't reckon it's as close as you'd say. Personally, I think Neon should just be able to run them over. Like, Natsumi knows how Execration plays really well as well, so the entire stack are just on top of how Execration plays, and it's going to make it harder for Execration to eke out a win there.
And that leads us to our last series, and I've got to say, all these series seem very hard to predict. T1 versus TNC is the final matchup of Week 3. Now, usually I just say TNC outright, to be honest, but I don't know. They just haven't looked stable as of late, and for me, it's just going to be a question of how T1 are feeling that day, quite frankly. I feel like if T1 are on top of their game, it should be a pretty clear-cut victory for them, but you got to watch out for TNC. They like to run those sneaky kinds of drafts, and they have plenty of experience playing against a carry player like Jackie now, as well as Geek Fam, of course, which, 4 out of 5 of Geek Fam are in the side of T1. My heart's telling me T1, but I have a lot of trouble going up against TNC. But I am going to say T1. I'm going to stick with my guns here. T1 is the vote.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to ride with you on this one. T1 as well coming out, because I think for me it boils down to Cuckoo matching up against TNC, and I feel like Cuckoo studied TNC a lot. Like, that's probably the one team that frustrates Cuckoo the most because of how close his stack and Geek Fam were historically to TNC. How many times TNC has upset Geek Fam in the past. So I think this is something Cuckoo has a bit of an axe to grind. He has to prove his point that the unstoppable Philippine Giants are going to be taken out by the Korean telco T1. I think he wants to show that off. So, hey, I'm going to say T1 because of Cuckoo. And if Cuckoo watches this, he still owes us a trip to Okada.
True, absolutely. And I've got to kind of correct you, John. I mean, you said the unstoppable Filipinos on TNC. They've clearly been stopped quite a few times so far. To my complete shock, because you'll remember in the pilot episode of Surfing the Sea, I did outright say TNC was the best team in SCA right now. They are proving my point completely wrong at the moment. And as much as I'd love to see them move their way up in this week, it's hard to see it up against T1. I think it could go either way. But let's see how it all pans out, John. It should be a very exciting week with some pretty close matchups. I can see you've also copied most of my predictions, which is very upsetting for me, John. I enjoy beating you. It's not a matter of me just getting it right. I need to beat you. Regardless, though, there's one different. We can argue over that later. With that, John, any other words to say before we head out for this episode?
Now, if you guys have any feedback on the format, me and Mike are on Twitter and on Facebook, where this is flying out in both of those social channels as well. So let us know. Watch out for, again, a bit of a podcast coming down the line. We're still sorting our schedule because NADPC did shift a bit. So we're readjusting to that time and trying to find a good time to get our guests on, to find a time where Mike's not doing production and we're free. But we will have that up. We've got guests planned, and hopefully you guys stick around for that as well to see some insights from some of our players in Southeast Asia.
With that, it is MLP Dota and John X Fire, and we'll see you guys next time for the next episode of Surfing the Sea. See you then.